Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Firefighters podcast, where we seek to develop, inspire, and motivate the world of the emergency services operator through a series of wide-ranging conversations. Now, before we go any further, just hit that rate, follow, or subscribe button on whatever platform you're listening to. It's a key performance indicator for us and helps us reach even more people. Now, here's what we've got for you today. Today on the podcast, we're getting into another operational debrief, and this time we're looking at a multi-family residential fire in Massachusetts from November 2019. This is a 3-story balloon frame building. Reported fire risk, crews operating above the fire, and a set of information gaps that quietly shaped everything that followed. One firefighter unfortunately lost their lives and several others were seriously injured. This episode, we're going to use a 4-dimensional framework around data, drivers, decisions, and do better, which is the structure in which the debrief itself was mostly broken down to. These are not my own judgments. These are ones that have been recorded. So we're going to strip back the incident to what was known about it at the time, not what we know now. We'll look at why crews and command did what they did and how the building and the fire behaved, where the pressure points appeared, and how quickly time, air, and options collapsed once things started going wrong. Again, this and all the debriefs is not about blame or anyone could do it better. It's about learning while the cost is paid by someone else, so that we, as a sector, don't have to pay it again. So the 4-dimensional operational debrief is going to be of the fatal residential structure fire that resulted in the line of duty death of a fire officer and a serious injury of multiple firefighters. We're going to break it down from the initial 999 call through to the Mayday, the rescue attempt, the eventual strategy change. Along the way, we'll explore how early reports of trapped child drove risk appetite, how critical information failed to reach command, and how crews became committed above a developing fire in a complex balloon frame building. We're going to examine the drivers that shaped the incident, including building construction. We're going to go through fire location, access and egress constraints, air management pressure, and the psychological weight of a perceived fire life rescue. We're going to pause at key decision points and ask why uncomfortable, but some necessary questions every incident commander and BA should be asking themselves in real time. Most importantly, we're going to try and translate the learning into hopefully some practical takeaways from the information that's given. We're going to do incident hygiene and information hygiene, if you will, above fire operations, Mayday disciplines, air management, and command structure under stress. This one's a good one for firefighters, for officers, instructors as well, and anyone who wants to understand how great firefighters do their absolute very best and can still be overwhelmed when systems, buildings, and fire behaviour collide. This is a big respect for our fallen firefighters, but the responsibility for us to think and do things a little bit differently next time. It is beyond a privilege to be able to bring the Firefighters podcast to you, and we are so grateful for every single person that supports, listens, shares, and follows our journey. But here's the honest truth. It takes a colossal amount of time and work to keep the podcast going. And to help us keep doing it, create more, reach more guests internationally, and make the podcast sustainable, we're asking for you to help. And to do this, we've set up a Patreon page. Now, if you've ever wanted to meet a member of the podcast, buy us a beer, buy us a coffee, and you think anything you've ever listened to on the podcast has been worth £3, that's basically what we're asking you for. By joining our Patreon community, you will get access to every single full episode archive we have ever made. Now, hundreds and hundreds of key documents that we've got in there on fire behaviour, firefighter health, cancer risks, instant debriefs, and so much more. So if you feel like you want to join the Patreon crew and help us make this possible, head to patreon.com/TFFPC or check the link in any episode podcast notes. In the early hours of the 13th of November 2019, a career fire officer was killed and 4 firefighters were injured while dealing with a multi-occupancy residential fire. Just after 1 a.m, multiple fire appliances and specialist units were mobilised to a reported fire in a residential building. Initial information stated that there was a fire on the 2nd floor with occupants still inside, and a baby was reported on the 3rd floor. From the outset, the incident was treated as a high life risk situation. First engine arrived within minutes and reported a lightweight timber constructed building with a heavy fire visible on the 2nd floor and one side of the building. Shortly after, a senior officer arrived, took command, and reported smoke showing from the roof and 3rd floor. Due to the extent of the fire conditions, additional resources were requested early. Crews began fighting fire operations from multiple sides of the building. An initial external attack was carried out on a visible fire to slow spread before crews committed inside. Firefighters then advanced internally to the 2nd floor from different access points. The ladder crew was assigned to work above the fire on the 3rd floor, and another ladder crew accessed the roof. Fire spread on the exterior and was also being dealt with at the same time by external crews. A rescue unit split into two teams, one operating on the second floor and one operating on the third floor. As crews moved to the upper levels, they encountered heavy fire, extreme heat, and worsening conditions, particularly in the third floor hallway. Fire was also affecting the main stairwell, making movement and access increasingly difficult. Crews on the second floor reached the room where the fire had started and knocked the fire down, but it was not fully extinguished. Fire continued to impact on upper floors. From outside, further hose lines were advanced and put inside to the third floor to support crews operating above the fire. Additional firefighters were assigned to the third floor as conditions deteriorated. Shortly after this, the ladder crew re-entered the building and made their way back to the third floor. Just minutes later, the officer from that crew transmitted a mayday. He reported that they were trapped on the third floor, surrounded by fire, with their exit blocked, and without a confirmed personnel accountability check. Command immediately acknowledged the mayday and deployed their rapid intervention crew to rescue the trapped firefighters. The trapped officer reported extreme heat and requested a hose line for protection. The officer and the driver from the ladder appliance had taken temporary shelter in a small enclosed porch structure on the third floor. As conditions worsened and escape options disappeared, the officer physically pushed the driver out through the third floor window to get him out of danger. The driver fell from the height, struck part of the building on the way down, and landed on the ground below. He survived the fall, but was injured. Shortly after it, it was reported that a firefighter had been found lying in the rear yard of the property. Crews located the firefighter and requested immediate medical support. Over the next 20-plus minutes, multiple crews attempted to reach the trapped officer on the third floor. However, access to the third floor was severely restricted by a narrow, enclosed stairwell. Extreme heat, zero visibility, fire involvement, and a lot of debris. A hose line in the stairwell had burned through and was discharging water uncontrollably, adding further obstruction and confusion between the second and third floors. Eventually, a combined rescue team forced their way to the third floor, and when they reached the landing, the entrance to the porch area was blocked by debris again, so firefighters breached through a wall to gain access. Crawling across the porch and avoiding collapse holes, they followed the sound of the officer's distress alarm. Firefighters breached the door of the small porch enclosure and located the officer inside. Crews then carried the officer down the stairs from the third floor to the ground level, through the rear of the building, where medical teams were waiting. The officer was transported to hospital, but was later pronounced deceased. The fire was eventually brought under control several hours later, and the incident was formally closed later that morning. Following the incident, the National Fire Safety Authority in the United States formally notified the country's occupation safety investigation body that the firefighter had died during operations. Over there, it's referred to as the National Institute for Operational Safety and Health, NIOSH, which is also recognized in many places around the world. A few days later, a general engineer, an investigator, and a safety specialist from the Massachusetts NIOSH Fire Safety Fatality Investigation and Prevention Program traveled to Massachusetts to investigate the incident. Their role was to understand what happened, why it happened, and what could have been learned to prevent similar incidents elsewhere. They met with fire department officials, including the fire chief, deputy chief of operations, the deputy chief of services, deputy chief of safety, the chief of training, and members of the department's fire investigation unit. NIOSH investigators also met with representatives of the International Association of Firefighters, local, and representatives from the City Buildings and Zoning Office. They visited the city's dispatch center, they obtained a copy of the fireground audio, they visited the incident site and conducted interviews with the fire department officers and firefighters directly involved in the fatal incident. They examined and photographed the personal protective equipment and breathing apparatus worn by the firefighter who died, and reviewed the fire service's training records and operational procedures. Several weeks later, members of the investigation team returned to complete follow-up interviews and finalize the evidence gathered. For context, the fire service that's involved is a full-time professional organization responsible for fire and rescue cover across a large urban area, serving a population of just over 200,000 people, rising significantly during the day due to commuters, students, and businesses. The city includes a wide variety of risk, from densely populated residential buildings to multi-occupancy housing to high-rise offices, industrial sites, and manufacturing facilities. It also has multiple universities and colleges, adding to the population density and complexity. Major transport routes through the area, including large motorways and several rail lines, are served by this fire service. They also do medical response as part of their role. Basic and advanced medical care, along with patient transport, is delivered through a contracted ambulance service. The fire department itself operates 13 engine companies, 7 ladder companies, 1 heavy rescue company, 1 specialist unit, and 2 self-contained underwater breathing apparatus, scuba, dive rescue operations. The context of the working system, they are assigned to work one of 4 operation shifts. They work a 24-hour shift, followed by 2 days off, another 24-hour shift, and then 4 days off. A full shift roster includes 91 firefighters with a minimum staffing of 69. This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Gore-Tex Professional Fabrics. I have been wearing Gore-Tex for nearly 2 decades on the front line, working in hostile environments, tackling challenging incidents from firefighting to water incidents and in urban search and rescue environments. Gore-Tex have a well-earned reputation for protecting professionals in the fire and emergency services through their family of highly innovative, waterproof, breathable moisture barriers that exceeds global performance standards and are trusted worldwide. Gore-Tex, going further together. You'll remember back in the incident timeline, the trapped officer reported during the Mayday that they did not have a confirmed personnel accountability report. That's a bit of detail that matters because it does sit directly in the intersection with systems and stress. Now, the fire department itself that's involved used a formal process of personal accountability system based on daily crew riding lists. At the start and end of each shift, similar to the UK, each appliance is updated. A list that's showing exactly who is riding on that vehicle. At incidents, these lists are used to confirm who is committed to the structure and to conduct formal accountability checks, particularly during critical moments such as a mayday or a change from an offensive interior attack to a defensive exterior strategy. In theory, this system should allow command to quickly confirm who's inside, where they're assigned, and whether anyone is unaccounted for. However, in practice, sometimes during fast-moving, high-stress incidents with multiple crews operating on different floors and from different access points, that process can become strained if updates are delayed, missed, or not clearly communicated. In addition to manual accountability, the department was equipped with electronic firefighter tracking systems which are actually integrated into their breathing apparatus. Similar-ish to the SCBA that we use in the UK. However, each district level command vehicle also carries a handheld locator device which detects and tracks breathing apparatus units worn by firefighters inside the structure. This technology is designed to assist during mayday situations by helping command and rescue teams narrow down the location of a missing or trapped firefighter. However, it is a supporting tool, not a substitute for clear tasking, location reports, and a disciplined accountability throughout the incident. So in this incident itself, the Mayday declaration included a lack of confirmed accountability at the time when crews were operating above a developing fire. Conditions were obviously deteriorating and access routes were being compromised, and that combination of factors sharply increased the difficulty of the rescue effort and highlights why accountability systems only work when they're actively maintained and done, and obviously reinforced under pressure, not just written in a policy. At the time of this incident, there was no single national minimum standard in place across the wider region to actually become a firefighter. Instead, this fire service operated with a civil service system that is set by effectively its own entry and promotional requirements. So to be selected as a firefighter, candidates must first pass a written knowledge-based assessment and a physical ability test designed to simulate the demands of operational firefighting, similar to most departments in America. These tests were administered centrally and used ranked candidates. Once shortlisted, candidates are required to pass a full vetting process. It includes some background checks, drug screening, medical examination, and that met recognised operational health standards for firefighters. Priority was given to military veterans, local residents, and families of firefighters or police officers previously killed in the line of duty. All successful candidates, regardless of prior experience, all attend a full-time recruitment training course lasting approximately 4 months. This training covers equivalent, basically, of firefighting core professional standards, structural firefighting, breathing apparatus operations, search and rescue, fire behaviour, and incident safety. Most recruitment training is delivered at the service's own training centre, but there's a few small special elements such as live fire training, gas-fueled fires, and hazardous materials response, which are delivered at Regional Fire Academy. After that, they go into a structured probationary period, lasts around several months. They complete task books, maintain training and incident journals similar to the UK, and only after successfully completing the probationary phase, they become permanent posting at their stations, similar to the UK. Now, ongoing training is different a little bit. The service department themselves operated its own dedicated training department and live fire training facility. Training infrastructure allowed for repeated realistic scenarios, including residential fires, multi-story housing, commercial buildings, and high-rise environments. In terms of their training, they're required to train at least 1 hour per work shift and must complete about 8 training drills, covered 8 different topics in a month. They do back to basics training every Thursday in an effort to ensure that firefighters are familiar with the equipment, basic skills, ladder handle emplacements, SCBA emergency drills. And they also conduct annual mandatory training for recertification of CPR, emergency medical responders, and hazardous materials operations, which are all handled by the Fire Training Centre. Promotions process to all ranks is handled following something called the state's civil service promotional testing process. They do them every 2 years, and then when promotions occur, the fire department conducts a 40-hour officer development training program. Depending on what level they're at, they do a different certification at the academy. Lieutenants will do an 80-question examination, which they can do at 3 years in grade as a firefighter. Captains have to do 100 questions, and they can only do that after they've been a lieutenant for a year. District chiefs will do 80 questions, and again, after a year of being a captain, and you become a deputy chief another year after that, but you have to do an assessment centre and a panel interview. And then again, the fire chief is just another year after district chief, assuming the positions are available. The driving is an interesting element because the department don't actually employ a dedicated driver operator role. Instead, all firefighters are required to be competent to drive and operate the type of appliance that they are assigned to. Driver responsibilities are rotated regularly within the crews, which is something that'd be great to do in the UK. And it's the responsibility of company officers to ensure probationary firefighters receive appropriate driving and appliance training. In the debrief report, they go into the experience levels of the key personnel involved. Now, the officer who unfortunately lost his life had nearly a decade of service. He'd worked across multiple fire engines and ladder appliances before being promoted to an officer role approximately 1 year before the incident. He completed a wide range of training in hazardous materials, emergency medical response, rapid intervention, live fire training, large area search, thermal imaging, and fireground tactics. He also completed formal training in incident command systems and emergency communications, including Mayday procedures. The actual incident commander on the night had several decades of his service. He'd progressed through multiple operational roles. He held command positions on frontline appliances and had spent time within the training department. His training also included advanced command systems, fireground strategy and tactics, specialist rescue disciplines, and also did a recent intermediate level incident command and training completed literally weeks before the incident. So this is just to say that this is not an inexperienced service, nor were the firefighters involved undertrained or unfamiliar with the modern doctrine. The systems, training and qualifications were all in place. Nothing said different in the report, and that makes the incident particularly important to study because it reinforces the hard truth for firefighters everywhere, really. Even well-trained, well-equipped, experienced crews operating within the structured systems can be overwhelmed when information gaps, building behaviour, fire development, and time pressures just start collapsing and colliding. Now, we said we were going to talk about the building construction. This was a multi-family residential structure, and it was built in the 1900s. It had 3 floors, 3 stories, as they would say out there, and the structure had 3 floors plus a walkout basement. And each floor was approximately 1,000 square feet. Each floor was a separate apartment, with the basement being a small, unpermitted apartment. Structure was a balloon frame construction, and this construction method is very common in the New England area in America in the 1900s. Basically means it's got like vinyl siding on the exterior and was about 25 feet wide with about 41 feet long. And the second and third floors had an enclosed porch on one of the sides of the buildings with a large center window and an enclosed storage shed on the corner of it, which was pivotal in the incident above. After the incident was closed and the investigation completed, the medical examiner concluded that the officer died from severe heat exposure and inhalation of toxic fire gases. The level of carbon monoxide in the blood was relatively low, indicating that this was not simply a case of running out of air, but exposure to extreme heat and products of combustion in an untenable environment. The death was ruled accidental, meaning it occurred as a direct result of operational firefighting conditions rather than any underlying medical issue. In practical terms, this tells us that conditions deteriorated to a point where survival was just no longer possible. Even before the air supply was fully exhausted, heat, fire gases, and the location mattered more than time on air alone. There was a number of key recommendations that came out of this operational debrief, and the primary recommendation is that incident commanders must clearly define a strategy at an incident action plan based on what they see, what they know, and the level of risk they're prepared to accept. That plan cannot be static. It must be continually reassessed as conditions change. Information improves and tactical objectives are either achieved or fail. At the core of this is a structured size-up. So before committing crews and throughout the incident, command should consciously identify the critical factors that shape the fireground. These include the type of building, how it's laid out, how it's being used, and where people are or are believed to be. Where the fire is, what the resources are available, what actual actions are underway, and any unusual or complicating circumstances. Quick one, we're working in collaboration with the Blue Light Show, a national conference and exhibition built around one thing. Blue Light services do better together than apart. For learning, sharing, improving how we operate, it brings together fire, police, ambulance, and rescue all in the same place for actual proper conversations about leadership, operations, capability, and the challenges we are facing on the front line. It's about seeing what's possible, pressure testing ideas, and taking practical learning back into your organization. I'm going to be there 1st and 2nd of July 2026 at the event, getting involved with those conversations and connecting with people who really care about doing the job better across the blue light sector. Do not sleep on this. If you value collaboration over silos and you want to make insight into what's actually useful, Blue Light Show is the one to get in your diary. Visit www.bluelight.show. Book your spot. You will walk away with so many insights, fresh connections, and practical takeaways you can actually use day one back in the job. I'll see you there. Those factors are not like one of a checklist. They're a constantly live picture of what we talk about in the situational awareness, in the decision control process, and how we manage incidents. Good decisions rely on current, accurate, and relevant information. When the information is missing or wrong, the plan built on it becomes fragile and has to change. Life safety always remains a top priority. Stabilizing the incident comes next. Protecting property actually comes last, because firefighter safety runs through all three and is not a separate phase. Risk has always got to be matched to reward. And there are some really hard boundaries that apply everywhere really, and that is embedded in the firefighter maxim as it was in the UK, and that effectively high-risk action should only be taken when there's a realistic chance of saving life. Routine property protection carries inherent risks and should be managed carefully. If lives cannot be saved and the property cannot be protected, then firefighters should not be exposed to extreme danger. When conditions become excessive, operations can move to a defensive approach, and there's nothing wrong with that. But clear communication is critical. Conditions reports from all sides of the buildings must reach command and control. This is that cyclic size up they're always doing, and it includes where the fire is, how it's behaving, and how the building is reacting. Differences in building height or layout from the front and the rear matter, and sometimes they do differ, especially in the UK. If the floor changes levels from front to back, or if there's a basement, for example, basement access matters, hidden voids matter. These details shape tactics and must be shared early and repeatedly. Another major theme is recognizing little red flags, which are warning signs that significantly increase the likelihood of serious injury or death. They don't always mean abandon the plan immediately, but they demand attention and adjustment. Fires in basements or roof spaces, crews operating above a fire, zero visibility, combined with high heat, repeated requests for backup, which did come on this incident. Fire still visible after being declared under control is something we should start to question, really. Things like wind-driven conditions, smoke or fire leaking from walls or voids. These are small signals that conditions are either worse than expected or changing faster than planned. Commanders are definitely encouraged to adopt a pessimistic mindset during the size-up and assume conditions are worse until proven otherwise. Optimism is the one theme that comes through here, kills more firefighters than caution. First arriving crew plays a crucial role in setting the incident up for success or failure. The initial report on this one should paint a clear picture of what they're dealing with, what they're doing, what the strategies they're adopting. The first message becomes a foundation for every decision that follows. Fireground operations move fast and degrade quickly when information is poor. Simple, repeatable decision-making model helps keep control. It helps identify critical factors, decide what level of risk is acceptable, and declare a clear strategy, including setting tactical objectives that support that strategy, and then to build and communicate an incident action plan that everyone can follow. In this incident, the recommendations point towards a familiar but uncomfortable truth. What fails is often the translation of changing conditions into timely changes in strategy, especially when life risk, pressure, and uncertainty collide. That's the kind of space where this incident lives, and why it deserves to be studied carefully. One of the real recommendations in this and the clear lessons was from recommendation 3, and it's about the role wind played in accelerating conditions beyond what crews could reasonably manage. Wind-driven fire is not a different type of fire. It's a normal fire that suddenly becomes lethal because wind turns the structure into a furnace. Fire, heat, and smoke are pushed violently through the building along a flow path, often faster than firefighters can react. What makes wind-driven fires especially dangerous is how quickly or progressively they can start, and also how deceptive they are. Experienced firefighters who have survived them consistently describe the same pattern. On arrival, conditions look fine. Then within seconds, sometimes without even warning, the environment shifts from manageable to life-threatening. Crews report extreme heat, rapid fire spread, and a loss of tenability almost instantly. In wind-driven conditions, even large hose lines operating from wrong position can be ineffective. Water applied from the downwind side or into the exhaust portion of the flow path does very little to cool conditions. And in contrast, water applied from the upwind side into an inlet side of the flow path can dramatically reduce fire's intensity. Multiple real-world incidents and research burns have shown that directly attacking a wind-driven fire from the wrong position, even with 1 or 2 large hose lines, has led to serious firefighter injuries and near misses. What the research tells us is that wind doesn't need to be extreme to be deadly. Research has shown that wind speeds as low as around 10 miles an hour can be enough to create wind-driven fires if there is an uncontrolled flow path. That means a fire that looks like a simple room fire can turn into a floor-to-ceiling blowtorch in seconds once openings align. Temperatures exceeding 600 degrees Celsius and extreme radiant heat have been measured along these flow paths, not just in the fire room itself, but in the corridors, the stairwells, and the escape routes. These conditions can develop in under 30 seconds, and once the inlet and outlet are created, the wind gets hold of the fire and time just collapses. This is why it's so crucial to remember wind direction in our primary size-up or our 360 in the UK, not as a background detail, but as something we really need to be focusing on. The direction of the speed matters as much as the building type or the fire location. If wind-driven conditions are suspected at all, that information must be broadcast early and clearly so every responding crew understands the risk profile they're walking into. If you're a BA team working interior, can't operate in the exhaust side or the wind-driven flow path. That's where the worst heat and fire gases are going to exist. The safest place is upwind of the fire, not downwind, even if that feels counterintuitive at the time. For that fact, ventilation becomes a high-risk action. A single failed window or poorly timed roof opening for the States can intensely create a lethal flow path. Ventilation and fire attack must be tightly coordinated, or ventilation should be delayed entirely until it can be done so. In some wind-driven fires, the only viable way to regain control is a controlled exterior attack from the upwind side to reduce that just massive fire intensity before any interior operations are attempted. That's why when we're doing our 360, a full assessment of the rear of the building is critical. If you can't complete that, interior operations should really be thought about or potentially even delayed unless there's a clear and confirmed life rescue. So there's a lot of training resources out there about wind-driven fires, and one of the recommendations out of this is that firefighters and officers must be trained to recognize early indicators of wind-driven behavior. Fast-moving smoke, strong directional smoke flow, rapidly increasing heat, and the fire reacting violently to new openings is all a big warning sign. Understanding flow paths, and we've done episodes on this before, is a real non-negotiable. Crews need to know where the air is coming in and where the fire gases are going out, and where they're actually positioned in relation to that movement. In this fire, Wind conditions, the building layout, the ventilation actions combined to create a rapidly untenable environment at the moment the mayday was transmitted. What's important to understand is it doesn't require massively obvious and extreme weather. It doesn't even require any really unusual fuels. This is a standard domestic property. It required only wind, openings, and obviously the fire at that wrong moment in time. That's why wind-driven fire behaviour deserves some specific training and clear procedures, and you've got to wrap your hands around this. There's plenty of stuff available out there for you to look at it. And again, that is not a reflection on the competency of anybody involved in this incident. But again, that's the point of the debriefs. As we do more and more of these debriefs, trying to get that balance between factual, accurate, tactical, useful. So the original investigation document for this runs for more than 80 pages. But in this episode, we really tried to not just reproduce it line by line. Instead, we've pulled out what I think matters most on the fireground. So we've done the timeline, the key decisions, the conditions that shaped those decisions, and the factors that combined to unfortunately produce the fatal outcome. I've also deliberately added some context around how firefighters are selected, trained and promoted, and also commanded, so that the incident can hopefully be understood a little bit better by firefighters, regardless of the service, structure, or the country. And obviously this isn't about policy. It is about the people operating under pressure in the real buildings at the real incidents with fire that's behaving differently. So some final takeaways for firefighters, crews, officers. Firstly, it's treating information as a life safety tool. So life risk, updates, corrections and changes got to be confirmed, repeated and shared. So all this shared situational awareness that we speak about in the UK Fire and Rescue Service. Bad information is more dangerous than probably no information. Second is be ruthless about operating above a fire. If crews are committed above, firefighting media, the hose lines, their access, their egress and conditions must support that decision continuously and not just at the time when they were committed to it. If something's changed, we need to constantly reconsider if it's appropriate for them to be above the fire. Remember that the 360 never stops. We try and do it in the early stages of the incident. Maybe the initial incident commander does it or the 2IC. Got to keep doing that. The building's layout, the fire's location, the wind, the ventilation effects can change way faster than our plans can. So if conditions are changing, then our plan must change with them. Understanding the flow path, we went into that towards the end of this. Wind-driven conditions don't need extreme weather. Remember that. A single opening at the wrong time can turn conditions into a blowtorch. Accountability, which is something we do not better or worse, but maybe differently in the UK fire service. It's got to be active and not assumed. Got to know who's inside. Got to know where they are. Got to know what they're doing, especially when things start to go wrong. More water doesn't necessarily solve if it's in a bad positioning. So again, talking about that wind-driven fire, water applied from the wrong side of a flow path may have little effect on the interior conditions. And then if there's a number of those quote-unquote red flags, as they're referred to in this instant debrief, start to stack up, slow things down a little bit and step back. So if we've got high heat, zero visibility, repeated requests for support from the crews, fire is behaving strangely or not as you expected it to, these are signals that you need to change what you're doing or reassess it rapidly. And then finally, of course, it's important to always remember the reason we're able to do these debriefs is unfortunately due to the passing of a colleague. So we acknowledge the firefighter who lost their life at this incident, was very trained, he was very experienced, and he was doing his job in the service of others as any of us would do. So we owe it to him and to every firefighter who puts on a BA set and goes through that door. To learn from this incident and carry those lessons forward is the biggest respect we can give to our fallen colleagues and a responsibility to those that are going out in the trucks tomorrow. Hope you took a lot away from this debrief, and I'll see you next time. Well, that's it for today, folks. Hope you took a lot away from that episode. We started the Firefighters podcast to develop, inspire, connect, motivate, represent, and most importantly, celebrate the world of incredible emergency services operators and the wider sector through this series of wide-ranging conversations We really love creating this podcast and bringing it to so many people. Did you know you can also find these on YouTube? We do a lot of video podcasts now. You can head over to our YouTube page and follow, subscribe there. And as a final ask from us, whatever platform you're on, please rate the podcast. It really helps us as a key performance indicator to reach more and more people. I've been your host, Pete Wakefield. This has been the Firefighters Podcast. And wherever you are in the world, please stay safe, be happy, live with intention, and where possible, please remember and support your firefighters and first responders. I'll see you next time.